I'm going to be talking about acceptance and commitment therapy. And as Rob introduced, I am a clinical psychologist. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is I want to thank you guys for being open to having a psychologist talk to you about pain. The number of times that I have clients say to me, why am I seeing a psychologist for my pain? I have a physical injury. And the reality is psychology has a huge role in pain. So pain takes a toll on all of our psychological resources. It's really distressing. It's like having this low level of distress all the time. Chronic pain, as we've talked about a little bit already, is associated with anxiety, depression. A lot of time people are feeling grief and loss, and there can be intense feelings of frustration and also a certain amount of frustration and just feeling like you're overall misunderstood. So I want to start off by saying thank you. Thank you for being open to being part of this session and also for being open to psychology as a part of pain. So I'm going to do a disclosure. Some of the stuff that I'm hoping you won't hear today is things that you've probably heard a million times from all different places. I'm going to not say that I know what you're going through. I'm going to try not to say, don't focus on it or just ignore it. I won't tell you that others have it worse than you, so you should feel lucky. And even though I'm a psychologist and I know that there's pain receptors and neurotransmitters that are involved with pain, I'm not going to say it's all in your head. And I'm not going to tell you that I can make it all better. I mean, the reality is this isn't about that. This is going to be about your pain and how it's a real part of your experience. Your pain may or may not change when we go through this exercise, and your experience is entirely unique. So what I will tell you is that this today is going to be about you. Acceptance and commitment therapy is a psychological intervention. It focuses on acceptance and mindfulness together with being committed to making changes in our behavior to increase our psychological flexibility. So it's basically learning how to adapt. It emphasizes connecting with your thoughts, feelings, sensations, even if they're unpleasant. That's the tricky part. And things that we've previously avoided, and allows you to take control by making choices that let you go towards your values instead of focusing on what you're trying to avoid. So the goal in acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is to have a psychological shift, not just a change in the reduction of our symptoms. It's changing how you interact with your pain and how that pain impacts your life. So, sounds easy enough. It's a lot harder to do. For people that have been living with pain, a lot of times they say things like, I've been trying to avoid flare-ups. I try to avoid doing too much. I try to avoid going out. And the reality is, how is that working for you? So if your pain and what you're doing every day is revolving around trying not to increase that pain, what is that costing you? How much are you avoiding by living that way? And the reality is we can't go through life avoiding things. And if you're constantly running away from something, you can never stop, you can never find peace. So you cannot find peace by avoiding life. So how do we do that? How do we stop avoiding? So mindfulness. Mindfulness is one of these things that is everywhere. Everybody talks about it. We've heard it mentioned today already. I think a lot of times people overcomplicate it. They make it sound like it's really complex, and it's really pretty straightforward. So mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment on purpose without judgment. Paying attention in the present moment on purpose without judgment. So we're going to start this off by doing a mindfulness exercise. That mindfulness exercise, I want to have a few things to preface it before we do the exercise. All of you can do this. This is not magic. This is not complicated. And you do not need a quiet space to be doing this. You do not need to have a room filled with crystals or quiet lighting. You don't need to have experience or training in yoga. You do not need to have a yurt or listen to Cat Stevens. You do not need to have perfect attention span, and you don't need a lot of time. That's why we're going to do it right now. And mindfulness is a practice. And the definition of practice is that you're going to keep doing it and you're going to start over. So if you find yourself getting distracted, just start over. If you find that you're having a thought that comes in or you're getting uncomfortable, you have to move, just start over. So I'd invite you with me now, wherever you are and wherever you're sitting, on your couch, on your bed, maybe you're standing. I invite you to do this mindfulness exercise with me. So just being comfortable so that we can stay in this space for the next couple of minutes. Just notice your breath. Just take your attention and notice your breath. Notice it moving in and out. Notice if it feels like it's moving freely or if it's shallow. And again, don't forget, not judging, just noticing. And now wherever you are, just notice 5 things that you can see. Maybe it's a tree outside your window. Maybe it's the furniture in your space. Maybe it's the screen in front of you. Maybe it's a painting or image. Maybe it's your own body, your hands. And next, I want you to notice 4 things that you can touch. So 4 things that you're making contact with right now. And again, you're just noticing. It might be where your feet have contact with the floor, where your hands are connecting with a table or keyboard. It might be where your hands are touching each other. It might be your back against the chair. And then moving into 3 things that you can hear. It might be birds in the distance or traffic. It might be my voice. It might be the hum of appliances. And by doing this, by simply noticing, you've connected to that present moment on purpose. And now just notice what's going on inside you. Notice what's going on in your body and your thoughts. Don't forget, we're not judging. Don't try and change them. They might be uncomfortable. They might be unpleasant. You're just noticing. Now coming back to that breath and appreciating the time that you spent connecting to the present moment. And coming back to your awareness. There you go. You did it. You did mindfulness. So now we're going to move on to one of the next concepts in ACT, and that is that you are not your pain. So There's two concepts here: the self as context and cognitive diffusion. And those are pretty abstract and they're kind of tricky to understand. So I'm going to take a stab at it. In the exercise that we just did, instead of trying to avoid sensations or feelings, you leaned into them. You actually looked them square in the eye. And by leaning into that, what did you notice instead of running away? What did you notice inside yourself? What did you notice about your thoughts and your sensations? What changed for you, if anything? Did you have an emotional reaction? Was it calming? Did you feel grounded? That was you being the scientist, watching you interacting with your body like an experiment. That was you noticing what's happening within yourself. You were observing yourself. That's self as context. It's not that you are what you're experiencing, but it's having that capacity to observe what you're experiencing and then using that as information. And I want to go back to that piece around not judging. So we need to be kind to ourselves. Don't judge yourself. What you did was perfect, every single one of you. And what did you learn from it? That's the takeaway. Scientists don't judge data that they collect. It's not good or bad. It's just data. That's what you were doing. So be kind to yourself. The reason I keep harping on this brings us to the next concept, which is cognitive diffusion. So in cognitive diffusion, we're trying to separate ourselves from those thoughts that are maybe negative, those thoughts that are guilt and shame, and things that tie us to our negative thoughts so that they become maybe more of our identity than they should. So when people say that when they describe themselves and the first thing they say is what their injury is or what their pain condition is, it's almost like saying that's how you're introducing yourself. And that shouldn't be the core of our identity. Oops, I just did it. All right, that's a good segue into this next part. We need to stop saying should. People say things like, I should be working. I shouldn't be in bed so much. I shouldn't be this inactive at my age. I should be getting out more. I should be eating healthier. The reality is we need to stop shoulding all over ourselves. We are far too hard on ourselves and we're constantly acting like we're not doing enough. And we often say that our symptoms are the reason that we are not the people we want to be. But you are not your symptoms. You are not your poor sleep or your pain. They impact you, but they are not you. So if you think like you're a container and your identity is this container and your pain is definitely in there, we don't want to throw everything else out and only hold the pain and only feed the pain. We want to recognize that there are so many other things in there. And we don't want to let those go. And often we end up doing that. We say things like, I used to be this and I used to be that. And the reality is you still are. Pain came in and it needed our attention and we had to bring it into our existence. But it is not the sum total of who we are. So I'm going to ask you to engage in another experiment, even if it's just for today. We're going to try to stop using the word but. So we're not going to have any buts. We're going to try and use the word and. When people say but, it tends to negate whatever came before it, and it focuses on whatever came after it. I'll give you an example. Someone who's experiencing pain might say, I used to be a pilot, but since my back injury, I can't do anything anymore. It's like you're negating what you used to be, even though that was part of your identity. And you're focusing entirely on the injury and the experience that you're having with pain. Instead, Those things are both true. So you could say, I am a pilot, and since my injury, I can't do that. So by using and, you're making space for both of those to be true in your present moment and in your existence, instead of acting like one or the other has to be there. Like if you can't be the way you were before, then what you are now must not be good. That is not fair to yourself. So just for today, maybe even tomorrow, notice how often we say but. And when you do it, catch yourself and try and use the word and. Right now, we put a lot of emphasis on pain and our experience with pain. And I want you to kind of think about it in terms of how much of that takes over of how we describe ourselves and who we are. So the exercise that they often use in ACT is that you write an epitaph. So what would it say on your tombstone if we're talking about our pain experience? So how would you describe yourself? But my husband pointed out to me last night when I was working on this that it's a little dark to have a tombstone. So I was trying to think, what could we use instead? So maybe a tweet. Like, what would you tweet about yourself? So what would you say if you were sending out a tweet? But Donald Trump uses Twitter. We don't want to use that. Maybe a Facebook post. So what would you say on a Facebook post about your pain or about yourself in relation to your pain? Maybe an Instagram post. Insta's pretty hot with the kids these days, I understand, but I don't know if that's the right form. Oh, I know. Let's do a Tinder profile, because that's a social networking platform to go out and make friends. So if you were going to describe yourself in a profile, whichever one you choose, how would you describe yourself? So just take a minute and you can think about that or you can write it down. But what would your profile post say? Would you focus on the things that you can't do right now? Would you talk about the things that you've lost? Would you talk about yourself in the past tense, about who you used to be? So that's some pretty heavy stuff to get in touch with. And that brings us on to the A in ACT, which is acceptance. So acceptance often gets misconstrued. Acceptance is not saying that you just got to suck it up and deal with it and it's never going to change. That is not what acceptance is meant to say. Acceptance is basically saying, this is where I am right now. That's what I got to work with. It's not looking into the future and hoping for something to magically change or for something to come to you. That tends to cause anxiety if we're worrying about the future. And it's not looking behind you at how things used to be. That tends to make us feel guilt and shame. It's about saying, this is where I am right now. And in that space, you see what you have available to you. What are the resources you have right now? And that's what you got to work with. It's learning to adapt based on what you have right now. So we are in a great example of acceptance. COVID came out of nowhere. I saw a great meme that said, everyone who said 5 years ago, here's where I see myself in 5 years, was 100% wrong. None of us saw it coming, yet here we are. When COVID really hit home in mid-March, everybody's life changed. And there were people who said, no, I'm not going to act like COVID's a thing. They're blowing out of proportion. It's not a real thing. It's not going to change my life. I'm not changing anything. Forget about it. And they were trying to push it away. And again, that's anxiety provoking. And then there were the people who were trying to say, okay, I have to be prepared for it. It's going to wreck my life. It's going to change everything. I need to be prepared. And they started worrying. And they were running out and frantically buying things like toilet paper. And then there were people who were saying, like, our life is never going to go back. We need to go back to normal. We need to go back to the way it was. And they were constantly looking behind. And everyone at some point had to get to a place where they said, this is how it's going to be right now. And out of that, you can say, all right, so here we are. COVID is here. I've never used Zoom. I've never used FaceTime. I guess I'm going to start because I want to connect with my family and friends. So you learn to adapt. I've never ordered my groceries online. I guess I'm going to start. Even this experience that we're having right now, where a number of incredible people are trying to reach out to people experiencing pain, and we're doing it virtually. This wasn't even a thought a few months ago to be done in this way, in this concept for all of you today. Accepting where you are now and then saying, okay, this is what we have. Now, what do we want to do with it? That's adapting and psychological flexibility. So now that we're learning to adapt and we're learning that we can move and we don't have to stay stagnant and we can take what we have around us, what do we do with it? We move towards our values. So values, they're kind of like a compass. They're the compass that guides your life. These are things that you will never stop working towards. So a great example is parenting. There's no way that you're ever going to stop trying to be a good parent. You're not going to get to a point where you're like, yep, they're 18, they're out of the house, they have their own kids, I can stop being a good parent now. You're always going to have that as something you're working towards. Maybe it's success. Maybe it's your career. You're never going to get to a point where you're going to say, yeah, I've made this much money, I can just stop trying to work towards improving myself. I can stop learning. Values are the things you will never stop changing. Love, integrity, your health. They're basically things you're never going to give up on. This is where we should be investing our energy. And if you think about how much time you're investing in things like trying to avoid flare-ups and trying to avoid pain or thinking about pain, and the reality is it doesn't work. And you're costing your values. So if you think for a second about your values and what's most important to you. Oh, whoops. Right, too dark. Let's go back to our profile. So if you were going to write a profile about what is most important to you, your values, what would that look like? Would you be talking about your family? Would you be talking about your connection with nature? Would you be talking about your overall health? So, I didn't tell you guys at the beginning that there was going to be some homework here. But I'd like to invite you guys into doing some work around seeing where you're sitting right now. Now that we know that you've got your values and we know that you've got this part called pain, we're going to do an exercise. So if you have a piece of paper, put it in front of you. I find using landscape, so having it sideways tends to work a little bit better. And I want you on the right side of your page to write the word suffering. And under that, I want you to put down all the things. And again, this is kind of like being mindful and leaning into those things that cause us discomfort. But write down all the things that contribute to your suffering. I'm pretty sure that we're going to have pain under there. Maybe we'll have lack of sleep, low energy, low mood, low motivation, sadness, grief, insecurity, self-consciousness. But get a list. And oddly enough, this is usually the easy part. This is the part people can come up with a list of things that are contributing to their suffering, no problem. Now, the next thing I want you to do is to have your values. So this is unique and for you. These are your values. Maybe it's your children, your spouse or partner, your pets, your home, your career, your health. So on the left side, we have our values. On the right side, we have our suffering. And I want you to see that these are two ends of a spectrum. They are not one or the other. They are a spectrum. And now inviting you again to just take a moment and looking at that spectrum and all the things that you value and the things that keep you in your suffering. Where do you fall on that spectrum right now? How close are you to living those values? And how close are you to being in your suffering? And just put an X wherever you are. That's where you are right now. And I want to congratulate you guys on checking in with yourself and owning and acknowledging and leaning into the fact that there is pain and suffering, and that not everything is sunshine and rainbows, and it's not just about thinking positive. So when we realize that we're on a spectrum, it shows us that we also have choices. We don't have to stay where that X is on that line. We can move in either direction. We can move closer to our values, and we can move closer to our suffering. So every day we have choices that we can move towards our values and away from our suffering. And other times we make choices that maybe move us a little closer to our suffering, and that's okay too. So I like to give an example of McDonald's and Safeway, Save On, Superstore, whatever it might be that you connect with. So when you look at it like being close to your suffering, that's like living next to McDonald's. So when you're living next to McDonald's and you're just and you're not being mindful and you're not being accepting and you're not being in the moment and you're just going through life trying to avoid unpleasant feelings, you probably have no idea how often you're going to McDonald's. You don't notice how much you are spending time going there because you're just kind of going through the motions. And you know that you should be going to Safeway and you should be eating healthier and you should be buying groceries and you should be cooking better meals and you should all over yourself. And that's where that guilt and shame comes in. But you're also not being mindful about it. You're also maybe not recognizing that you have a choice. So maybe one day you get a recipe or you come across your grandmother's chocolate chip cookie recipe or a recipe that you see on Facebook. And you decide, I'm going to go get the groceries and I'm going to make that recipe. That is making a decision to move towards your values. And then it becomes about trying to figure out how to do that. Maybe you order the groceries online. Maybe you have to take someone with you because you can't lift everything that you need at the grocery store. But you're making those decisions and you're being mindful about it. And then you get the groceries and you come home and maybe you ask for help. And you reach out, which is a really brave thing. And you ask someone to help you make that recipe. And now you're connecting with other people. And that's another one of your values. So now you're moving a little bit closer. And then you sit and you enjoy that you made that recipe. And you own it and you celebrate that. And you didn't end up going to McDonald's again. And you don't have the guilt and all of that. And you're not going into that suffering space. So you've moved towards your values, you've owned it, you're proud of it, and it makes you feel a little more like the person you want to be. Now, here's the cool thing, that when you're making decisions mindfully, you own them and you don't feel bad about it. So maybe there's a day, it's a bad day. The weather's terrible, the weather's cold, and you just don't feel like getting out of bed. I think we've all had at least one of those during COVID. Maybe it's the day that your camera doesn't work and you get really frustrated. So when that happens, maybe you decide I shouldn't go to McDonald's, and then you end up going without thinking about it. But you say, today is a day that I am going to go to McDonald's. So you make a choice and you own that choice. And you say, today is a crappy day. So I'm going to go to McDonald's and I'm going to get myself some nuggets. And the best part about it, because you're mindful in making that choice, is you're not going to feel shame. You're not going to feel guilt. You're going to own it. And you will probably actually enjoy every single bite of those French fries or nuggets or whatever your go-to Mickey D's meal is. And then you can kind of say, all right, and tomorrow I can go to Safeway and get those groceries. So we end up being able to go in both directions without judgment. And overall, we end up moving closer to our values and owning that experience and feeling like we have more control. So this is a big, big statement. Pain is inevitable. Whether it's emotional pain, whether it's physical pain, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And I'm going to let that just sit for a second. Suffering is optional. So how can we make it less about suffering? The pain is still there, but less about suffering. And we do that by a commitment to action. So no matter how small, that little choice that you make that decision. That's you taking back control. That's you putting your energy into a better part of you. It's you feeling like there's more to you than just your pain. You own that action. You mindfully experience it. So you connect with it internally. You analyze it, and then you evaluate it. So you decide afterwards, was that a good thing I did? Should I celebrate that? Or was that maybe not the best choice? And that kind of increased my pain, but it was worth it. So those commitments to action are things that are going to allow you to feel like you're in control, and they help you to move towards those values. So if you think like values are the compass, goals are the checkpoints. So I'll give you an example. I know we can't have concerts right now in the time of COVID, but what if your favorite band was coming to town? A show that you've always wanted to see. And you really want to go to that concert. And you might say, I really want to see, let's think of somebody. I really want to see the Rolling Stones, but my pain won't let me get through a concert. See what you just did? That got negated. That experience that you're really excited about got negated by the fact that you made it about your pain. So instead, let's try and take out the but and say, and. I really want to see the Rolling Stones, and my pain makes it hard to sit through a concert. So what could we do? Could we plan ahead and say, you know what, it's on Friday evening, so I'm going to make sure I rest that day and I don't do too much activity? Am I going to make sure that I have a seat so that I can get up and sit down and I don't have to feel like I have to stand the whole time? Am I going to go with somebody so that I have a support person, so that I can have somebody that I can reach out to if I need assistance? Maybe you skip the opening act and you focus on the big show, but you make that commitment to going to the concert. And now you've moved towards not only your values, because maybe it's music, just like Stuart and Safa, but you've also made that commitment that you are going to decide what is a part of your experience. And when you go to that concert, you reached your goal and you've moved towards those values. That's a commitment to action. So, do or do not. There is no try. So, very famous statement by Yoda. And as we all know, Yoda is clearly living with chronic pain because he's got his cane and he moves a little bit slowly. This is a huge statement. A lot of times when people living with pain are talking about trying. They say things like, I tried this and I tried that. I tried to do this. I tried to do that and I couldn't. And the reality is trying makes it sound like you failed. You didn't fail. You never failed in living with your pain. But if you commit without saying, I'm going to try, sometimes you're going to say, no, I can't. I can't make it through a whole concert. Maybe I can make it through the main act. I can make it through the main act. I'm not going to go to the opening act. Let's think about a wedding. I'll try to make it to the wedding. Well, if you don't, then you feel like you failed. And that's you shooting all over yourself and feeling the guilt and the shame. So instead of saying, I'll try to make it to the wedding, say, I'm going to make it to the ceremony. I'm not going to be able to make it to the dance. You own that decision. And that's okay. You own it. There's no shame in it. And then you can mindfully experience it. And you won't feel this anxiety like you're failing. So let's do or do not. There is no try. So I had a client who had been struck by a vehicle on the side of the highway. So he was standing on the side of the road and the vehicle was going around 80 kilometers an hour. And I had met with him multiple times, and it was always about his pain. And we never seemed to make any progress. And we seemed to be having the same conversation over and over and over. And it was frustrating for me. And I have no doubt that it was incredibly frustrating for him. And in a moment of frustration, I said to him, you know what? I'm just thinking maybe we should try something different. Let's not talk about your pain anymore. Let's not talk about your pain. And he kind of looked at me, and I was kind of a little surprised that maybe I shouldn't have said that. And then I decided to roll with it. I owned it. And after an incredibly long, uncomfortable silence, because we realized we had never really talked about anything but his pain, he talked about his wife. And he talked about how much he appreciated everything she did to help him. He talked about the kind of person she was and the kind of marriage they had and how they had met. And in that spirit, I asked him to commit to an action that would help him be one of his values, which was being a good spouse and being a good partner. And he committed to an action, and he had a lot of barriers because of his pain. But the action that he committed to was that he would figure out how to use the camera on his phone. He would take a photo of him and his wife, and he would use it as his screensaver. That was his commitment to action. And every time he unlocked his phone, he had a reminder of that action. And his wife very much appreciated that action. And that action led into him helping to make tea and having tea together and having conversations and moving him each step closer to being that value, which was for him being a good spouse. So that conversation that him and I had, I honestly think we talked about his pain very little after that, because it wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about so many other things that can fill your life. And the pain is still there without question, but there are so many other wonderful, colorful activities that fill that space. And they all sit in that vessel together as a part of who you are. So I'd invite you to make that commitment to action. So one of my clients, he wrote this in a book that we have for other clients to read about their experiences. And it said, you don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying there. So the last thing I'm going to invite you guys to do is to do one committed action that moves you towards your values and gets you out of the water. We don't need to stay in the water. And this is a quote by Donald Welsh. Spoiler alert, you guys already met that one, because you moved towards your values just by being in this space with all of us. So you've already met your goal and you've already moved towards those values. So I want you to take a moment, and the last mindful thing we'll do is take a moment to honor that you've already done something for yourself that's unique and just for you by being right here. And what that will lead tomorrow, who knows? But thank you, and you're amazing.